The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the quiet street as a motorcyclist revved his engine, zooming down the road without a care in the world. The air was thick with tension, but there was no hint of the storm that was about to break. As the motorcycle sped past a small park, it was hard to ignore the peaceful scene unfolding beside it. A young woman, no older than her 20s, stood by a bench, her cane tapping lightly on the pavement. At her side was her guide dog, a calm and steady golden retriever, quietly leading her along. It was a simple, almost mundane moment, but there was more going on here than met the eye. What the motorcyclist didn't see, what no one could have known, was the incredible story behind this pair. The dog wasn't just any guide dog. It had a past that few could ever imagine. For years, it had been a canine unit dog, a hero who had served with distinction in the police force, sniffing out danger and keeping the streets safe. It had saved lives, faced down criminals, and weathered the worst of what the world could throw at it. Now, it had a new purpose, helping a blind woman navigate the world, offering her the independence she never thought she'd have again. The bond between the two was inseparable, built on trust, loyalty, and the silent understanding that only the closest of companions could share. But in that moment, neither the motorcyclist nor the young woman realized that their lives were about to collide in the most unexpected way. As the man zoomed past, he caught a glimpse of the dog. And in that brief moment, his twisted sense of amusement flared up. Without thinking, he pulled over, dismounted, and walked up to the pair. The young woman, caught off guard, couldn't react fast enough. Before she could even say anything, the motorcyclist kicked the dog, mocking it with cruel laughter. The shock of the moment hit like a thunderclap, but it was just the beginning. What the man didn't know was that this wasn't just any dog, and that this act of cruelty would set off a chain of events that would change everything. For the woman, the attack was jarring, but for the dog, something deeper stirred. It was a force that had lain dormant for years, a part of its past that had been locked away, forgotten. The canine instincts kicked in, the training, the years of service to something much bigger than itself. And just like that, the situation shifted. The dog, once calm and obedient, now stood tall, its posture rigid, its eyes hardening with purpose. It was no longer just a guide dog. It was a protector, a warrior, and the motorcyclist had just made the mistake of a lifetime. As the motorcyclist froze, his laughter dying in his throat, the dog's gaze locked onto him with a fierce intensity. The woman, realizing something was wrong, reached for her dog, but the transformation was already happening. What was supposed to be a harmless prank was now the trigger for something far greater. The tension between the two was palpable, and it was clear that the moment had just begun. What would happen next? Would the motorcyclist realize his mistake before it was too late? Would the dog revert to its calmer role, or would its past rise up and take control in ways no one could predict? The stakes had never been higher. What followed next would change the lives of everyone involved in ways they could never have imagined. Stay tuned, because what happens here will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty, justice, and the power of the past. The motorcyclist stood frozen, his eyes locked on the dog, a strange sensation creeping up his spine. For a moment, he wondered if he'd misjudged the situation. But then the dog growled. A deep, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through the air, making his blood run cold. The guide dog was no longer just the calm companion of a blind woman. It was something else entirely, something more dangerous, something that was once trained to protect and defend, and it was reacting as though it had never forgotten that purpose. The young woman, still in shock, took a step back, instinctively pulling the leash tighter. Her mind raced, trying to process the events unfolding before her, but it felt like the world had slowed down. She had never imagined anything like this happening. The dog, loyal as always, had never shown a hint of aggression before. But there was something in its eyes now that told her it was no longer simply a pet. The canine training that had shaped this dog in its previous life, when it was part of the police force, was now coming to the surface. Every instinct it had developed over years of service had been awakened in an instant. The motorcyclist finally took a step forward, attempting to laugh off the moment, but the laughter was strained. He hadn't meant to escalate things like this. It was just a joke, wasn't it? He'd seen a guide dog before, but he hadn't known anything about the animal's history. He'd known the animal was once a trained officer, a protector, a fighter, and now he was in the middle of a situation far bigger than he had ever intended. For the woman, this wasn't just about her dog being attacked. It was about the trust she had placed in the animal, the sense of safety and security it had given her. For years, her guide dog had been her eyes in the world, allowing her to move through life with a sense of confidence she never thought she'd regain after losing her sight. She had learned to rely on its every move, to follow its lead. It was more than just a dog, it was her partner, her protector, her lifeline. Seeing it threatened, even in such a small moment, stirred something deep inside her. She couldn't let this go. She couldn't let this man harm her dog, especially not without consequences. The motorcyclist, still unsure of what to do, took another step closer, only to see the dog's body tense. The growl grew louder, and he could feel the shift in the air. A part of him realized that he was not in control of the situation anymore. But it wasn't until the woman, her voice shaking, finally spoke that he fully understood the gravity of what he had just done. "You don't know what you're messing with," she said, her words cutting through the tense silence like a knife. Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of warning in it that made the motorcyclist pause. The woman wasn't just some helpless victim, and this wasn't some random dog. She knew exactly what she was dealing with, and now the man was starting to realize that he might have bitten off more than he could chew. The motorcyclist's eyes flicked to the dog once again, watching as it stood tall and unyielding. Its muscles coiled like a spring, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. The fear was creeping up his throat now. This wasn't some ordinary pet. He hadn't expected it to react like this. Maybe he had underestimated it, or maybe he had just miscalculated how much danger he was in. But one thing was clear. He had made a mistake, and now, it seemed like it was too late to take it back. The woman moved slightly, her hands still gripping the leash, and for a brief moment the dog's eyes met hers. There was a silent understanding between them, a communication that transcended words. She didn't need to say anything. The dog was ready to protect her at all costs, just as it had been trained to do all those years in the force. And even though it had been years since it had worn a badge, the instincts were still there, buried deep inside, waiting to be called upon. The motorcyclist took a step back, his heart racing, his mind scrambling for a way out. But before he could move further, the woman stepped forward, positioning herself between him and the dog. The tension was palpable. This wasn't just a confrontation about a dog, it was about respect, trust, and the dangerous consequences of underestimating someone else's strength. "Leave us alone," the woman said, her voice calm but firm. "You've made a mistake, and I don't think you want to find out just how big that mistake is." The motorcyclist hesitated, torn between pride and fear. He had never expected something like this, a moment of such raw, unspoken power. He had mocked the dog out of sheer arrogance, faking he was in control. Now, as he faced the reality of the situation, he realized just how wrong he had been. But just as the moment seemed to reach its peak, a siren wailed in the distance. The sound sliced through the tension, and for the first time, the motorcyclist felt the faintest flicker of hope. Maybe help was on the way. Maybe this was his chance to escape the situation without facing the consequences of his actions. But something told him that this wasn't going to end so easily. The siren grew louder, and the dog's stance didn't waver. The woman held her ground. Something was about to happen, something that would change everything. The motorcyclist had no idea that the stakes had just been raised, and that the story of this encounter was far from over. Would the arrival of the police help defuse the situation, or would it only make things worse? The sirens grew closer, but the true resolution of this standoff was still hanging in the balance. One thing was certain, no one would walk away from this moment unscathed. The wail of the sirens grew louder, echoing down the street, but it didn't offer the relief the motorcyclist had hoped for. His eyes flicked nervously toward the approaching sound, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The dog was still standing firm, its posture unyielding, and the woman, her face set with determination, hadn't moved an inch. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still, like a storm suspended in the air. Then, the police car turned the corner, its lights flashing in the dusk. 2 officers stepped out, scanning the scene. The motorcyclist, desperate for a way out, tried to take a step back, hoping they would see his side of things. But as soon as the officers' eyes fell on the scene before them, the tense standoff, the stillness of the dog, and the firm presence of the woman, they didn't need much explanation. The situation was clear. It was more than just an act of cruelty, it was a threat that had been met with equal force. The officers quickly assessed the situation and moved toward the woman. "What happened here?" one of the officers asked, his voice calm but authoritative. The woman, though shaken, stood tall. She didn't need to explain everything. Her dog was already doing that for her. She spoke with clarity, recounting what had happened in short, controlled sentences. How the motorcyclist had mocked the dog, kicked it, not knowing who or what he was dealing with. The motorcyclist tried to interrupt, but the officer held up a hand, silencing him. The dog's reaction had said it all. The police officer's gaze shifted from the woman to the dog, who was still standing protectively by her side, the calm strength radiating from it. The dog was a living testament to the power of its past, a history that had now come full circle. There was no mistaking what had just happened. A trained canine had been attacked, and it wasn't about to let anyone get away with it. The tension in the air was thick, but now, there was an undeniable shift in power. The motorcyclist, realizing he was trapped, finally spoke up. "I didn't know. I thought it was just a regular dog." His voice wavered with a mix of fear and guilt. The officers gave him no sympathy. They had seen enough. What had started as a careless act had escalated into something far more serious. The motorcyclist had acted without understanding the gravity of his actions, and now it was clear. There would be consequences. The woman, still holding the leash, looked at the officers. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now. "I don't want him to get away with this. He needs to understand what he did." The officers nodded in agreement. They had seen too many people try to get away with cruelty, thinking they could just walk away unscathed. But this time, it wasn't going to be that easy. The motorcyclist's actions had awakened something in the dog that couldn't be ignored, and there would be no turning back now. The officers took control of the situation, guiding the motorcyclist to the side and questioning him further. As they did, the woman felt a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't just about the dog anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, about making sure that no one would treat an animal or any living being with such disregard. And as much as she had relied on her dog for so long, it was moments like this that made her realize the true power of their bond. The dog had done more than just guide her through the world. It had protected her, and now it was protecting others as well. As the police officers handled the motorcyclist, the woman crouched down beside her dog, running her hands through its fur. The tension in the air finally began to dissipate. She could feel the dog's muscles relaxing, the adrenaline fading, but there was still something intense in its eyes. It had done its job. It had stood up for her, just as it had been trained to do. And now, in this moment, it was clear. The dog wasn't just a guide. It was a true hero in every sense of the word. The motorcyclist was eventually taken away, his actions having consequences far greater than he had ever imagined. As the sirens faded into the distance, the woman and her dog were left standing together, the bond between them stronger than ever. She knew that, no matter what, they would face the world together. The world might not always understand their connection, but they didn't need anyone else to. They had each other. In the days that followed, news of the incident spread, and the story of the former canine that had protected its owner began to circulate. People marveled at the unbreakable bond between the woman and her dog, and many were left reflecting on the nature of loyalty, protection, and the consequences of thoughtless actions. What had begun as a cruel prank had turned into a story of redemption, justice, and the power of compassion. As for the motorcyclist, he would have plenty of time to think about his actions. But the woman, standing alongside her dog, knew that this was more than just a victory. It was a reminder that every act of cruelty has consequences, and that sometimes even the smallest actions can spark the most powerful change. The road ahead would still be filled with challenges, but with her dog by her side, she knew she was ready to face whatever came next. In the end, the story wasn't just about a motorcyclist and a blind woman. It was about the strength found in unexpected places, the unwavering loyalty of a dog, and the importance of standing up for what is right, no matter the cost.